It was a sunny Saturday afternoon, the kind of day where everything seems to go right, until it doesn't. The kind of day where you'd least expect a simple errand to turn into a life-altering moment. But for Marcus, a 32-year-old graphic designer with a passion for animals, that's exactly what happened. He had been dreaming of this day for months. After years of saving and researching, he was finally ready to bring home a furry companion. Little did he know, his trip to the local pet store would spiral into a confrontation that would leave everyone questioning their assumptions, and one woman's actions would go viral in the most unexpected way. Marcus walked into the pet store with a smile on his face, his mind racing with excitement. He had already picked out the perfect puppy online, a playful golden retriever with a patch of white on its chest. He could already picture the long walks, the late-night cuddles, and the joy of having a loyal friend by his side. But as he approached the counter to finalize the purchase, he noticed a woman standing nearby, her eyes narrowing as she watched him. She was in her mid-40s, dressed in a crisp blouse and sunglasses perched on her head, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. There was something about her demeanor that made Marcus uneasy, but he brushed it off. He was here for one thing, and nothing was going to ruin this moment for him. The woman, who we'll call Karen, though that's not her real name, seemed to be waiting for something. She lingered near the counter, her gaze never leaving Marcus. As he handed over his credit card to the cashier, Karen suddenly stepped forward, her voice sharp and accusatory. "Excuse me," she said, her tone dripping with suspicion. "Can I see some ID?" Marcus froze, confused. The cashier, a young woman named Emily, looked equally startled. "Ma'am, he's just buying a puppy," Emily said gently, trying to diffuse the situation. But Karen wasn't having it. "I don't feel comfortable with this," she snapped. "I need to make sure he's not, you know." Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Marcus felt a knot form in his stomach. He knew exactly what she was implying, and it wasn't the first time he'd experienced this kind of treatment. But this time, something felt different. This time, he wasn't going to let it slide. Before Marcus could respond, Karen pulled out her phone and dialed 911. "Yes, I'd like to report a suspicious person," she said, her voice loud enough for everyone in the store to hear. "He's trying to buy a puppy, and I don't think he's who he says he is." Marcus could feel the eyes of everyone in the store on him. His heart raced, but he forced himself to stay calm. He knew he hadn't done anything wrong, but the weight of the situation was overwhelming. Emily, the cashier, tried to intervene. "Ma'am, there's no need for this," she said firmly. "He's a paying customer, and he's done nothing wrong." But Karen wasn't listening. She was determined to see this through, convinced that she was doing the right thing. As the minutes ticked by, the tension in the store grew thicker. Marcus could hear the faint sound of sirens in the distance, and his stomach churned. He thought about all the times he'd been judged unfairly, all the times he'd been made to feel like he didn't belong. But this time, he wasn't alone. The other customers in the store began to murmur, their voices rising in support of Marcus. "This is ridiculous," one man said. "He's just trying to buy a dog." Another woman chimed in, "You should be ashamed of yourself." Karen, however, stood her ground, her arms still crossed, her expression unyielding. She was convinced she was in the right, and nothing anyone said could change her mind. When the police arrived, the situation took an even more unexpected turn. The officers, clearly confused by the call, approached Marcus and asked for his side of the story. As he explained what had happened, one of the officers recognized him. "Wait a minute," the officer said, his eyes widening. "You're Marcus Johnson, aren't you?" Marcus nodded, surprised. "Yeah, that's me." The officer turned to Karen, his expression stern. "Ma'am, do you know who this man is?" Karen shook her head, her confidence wavering for the first time. No. Why should I? The officer took a deep breath, as if preparing to deliver news that would change everything. Marcus here is a well-known animal rights activist. He's been working with local shelters for years, and he's one of the most respected voices in the community when it comes to animal welfare. The room fell silent. Karen's face turned pale, her mouth opening and closing as she struggled to find words. Marcus, meanwhile, felt a mix of emotions: relief, anger, and a strange sense of vindication. But just when it seemed like the situation was about to resolve itself, something even more shocking happened. As the officer continued to speak, Marcus noticed something unusual about the puppy he was trying to buy. The golden retriever, the one he'd fallen in love with at first sight, had a small tag on its collar that he hadn't noticed before. It was a tiny, almost invisible detail, but it caught his attention. He leaned in closer, his heart pounding as he read the words engraved on the tag. What he saw there would change everything. Not just for him, but for Karen, the police, and everyone else in the store. But before he could process what it meant, the officer's radio crackled to life, and a voice came through, urgent and tense. "We've got a situation. We need all available units to respond immediately." The officer's eyes widened as he listened, and then he turned to Marcus, his expression grave. "I'm sorry, but we're going to need you to come with us." And just like that, the story took another dramatic turn. Marcus, still reeling from the discovery on the puppy's tag, found himself caught in a web of events that went far beyond a simple misunderstanding. What had started as a dream day was now spiraling into something he could never have imagined. And as for Karen, she stood there, her earlier confidence shattered, realizing that her actions had set off a chain of events she couldn't control. But the biggest question remained unanswered. What was on that tag? And why did it matter so much? The answers would come, but not before more secrets were revealed, more tensions rose, and more lives were changed forever. And as the screen fades to black, one thing is clear. This story is far from over. Marcus sat in the back of the police car, his mind racing. The puppy, now cradled in his arms, seemed to sense his unease and nuzzled closer to him. The tag on its collar still weighed heavily on his thoughts. He had barely had a chance to process what it said before the officer had ushered him into the car. The words were simple but cryptic. "Property of Green Valley Research. If found, call 555-0192. What did it mean? Why would a puppy from a local pet store have a tag like that? And why did the police seem so interested in it? Marcus glanced out the window, watching as the streets blurred past. He wanted to ask questions, but the officers up front were deep in conversation, their voices low and urgent. Something big was happening, and he had a sinking feeling he was about to get pulled into the middle of it. Meanwhile, back at the pet store, Karen was left standing in stunned silence. The other customers had dispersed, murmuring among themselves, but she couldn't bring herself to move. Her heart pounded as she replayed the officer's words in her head. Marcus wasn't just some random guy. He was a respected member of the community, someone who had dedicated his life to helping animals. And she had just accused him of being suspicious for no reason. The weight of her actions began to sink in, but it was quickly overshadowed by something else. Curiosity. What had Marcus found on that tag? Why had the police taken him away so abruptly? She glanced around the store, her eyes landing on Emily, the cashier, who was now on the phone, her face pale. Karen hesitated, then walked over. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice quieter now, almost timid. Emily looked up, her expression a mix of fear and disbelief. "I don't know," she said, "but something's not right. That puppy, it wasn't supposed to be here." As the police car pulled into the station, Marcus's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the officer's voice. "We're going to need to ask you a few questions," the officer said, his tone firm but not unkind. Marcus nodded, still clutching the puppy. He was led into a small room where another officer was waiting. The room was stark, with a single table and 2 chairs. Marcus sat down, the puppy resting in his lap. The officers exchanged a glance before one of them spoke. "Mr. Johnson, we need to know everything about how you came to be in possession of this dog." Marcus took a deep breath and began to explain. How he'd seen the puppy online, how he'd gone to the store to pick it up, how Karen had called the police. The officers listened intently, their expressions growing more serious with each detail. When Marcus mentioned the tag, they exchanged another glance. "Can we see it?" one of them asked. Marcus hesitated, then carefully removed the tag from the puppy's collar and handed it over. The officer studied it for a moment, then handed it to his partner. "Green Valley Research," the second officer muttered. "I've heard that name before." Before Marcus could ask what they meant, the door opened, and a woman in a lab coat walked in. She looked to be in her 50s, with sharp features and an air of authority. "I'm Dr. Evelyn Carter," she said, introducing herself without preamble. "I'm with the Department of Animal Welfare. We've been tracking this puppy for some time." Marcus blinked, confused. "Tracking it? What do you mean?" Dr. Carter sat down across from him, her expression grave. "This puppy is part of a larger investigation," she explained. "Green Valley Research is a facility that's been under scrutiny for illegal animal testing. We believe this dog was taken from their lab and sold on the black market." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Illegal animal testing? Black market? This was way bigger than he'd imagined. But why would they sell a puppy? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Carter leaned forward, her eyes intense. "Because this isn't just any puppy," she said. "This dog is special. It's part of a genetic experiment. One that could have serious implications if it falls into the wrong hands." Marcus looked down at the puppy, his heart aching. It looked so innocent, so ordinary. How could it be part of something so dark? He thought about all the times he'd fought for animal rights, all the shelters he'd worked with, all the animals he'd saved. And now, here he was, holding a creature that represented everything he stood against. But there was something else too, a flicker of hope. If this puppy was special, maybe it could be used to expose Green Valley Research and put an end to their experiments. "What do you need me to do?" he asked, his voice steady now. Dr. Carter nodded, as if she'd been expecting the question. "We need your help," she said. "You're already involved, whether you like it or not, and you have something we need, access to the animal rights community. We need to get this puppy to safety, and we need to do it quietly. But we also need to gather evidence. If we can link this dog to Green Valley, we can shut them down for good." As Marcus processed her words, his mind raced with possibilities. He thought about the people he knew, the connections he had. He could reach out to his network, get the word out without alerting Green Valley. But there was one problem. Karen, she had already caused a scene. And if she started asking questions, it could blow the whole operation. He needed to talk to her, to make sure she didn't interfere. But would she even listen to him after what had happened? And what about the police? They seemed to be on his side, but he couldn't be sure. There were too many unknowns, too many risks. But one thing was clear. He couldn't walk away. Not now. Not when so much was at stake. Back at the pet store, Karen was still trying to make sense of everything. She had called her husband, but he hadn't answered. She felt alone, adrift. For the first time in a long time, she questioned her own judgment. Had she really been so quick to assume the worst about Marcus? And why did it feel like there was so much more to this story than she realized? She thought about the puppy, about the way Marcus had held it so protectively. There was something about the whole situation that didn't add up. She needed answers, but she didn't know where to start. As she stood there, lost in thought, her phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. The message was short, but it sent a shiver down her spine. You don't know what you've gotten yourself into. Stay out of it if you know what's good for you. Karen stared at the screen, her hands trembling. Who had sent this? And what did they mean? Before she could react, another message came through. A photo. It was a picture of her house, taken from the street. The message underneath was simple. We're watching. Karen's heart raced as she quickly dialed 911. But as she waited for the operator to answer, she hesitated. What would she even say? That she'd received a threatening text? That she was being watched? It sounded crazy, even to her. And yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was in danger. She thought about Marcus, about the way the police had taken him away. Was this connected? Was she somehow part of whatever was going on? The operator's voice came through the phone, calm and professional. 911, what's your emergency? Karen opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, she hung up, her mind spinning. She needed to talk to someone, but who could she trust? And more importantly, what had she stumbled into? As the screen fades to black, the tension is palpable. Marcus is caught in a web of secrets and danger. Karen is realizing the consequences of her actions. And the puppy at the center of it all holds the key to a mystery that could change everything. But with threats lurking in the shadows and time running out, one question remains. Who can they trust? And as the stakes grow higher, the answers seem further out of reach. The story is far from over, and the next chapter promises to be even more intense.